Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. We have a dynamic show for you today. The remarkable author Carl Gallups is here, and his latest book is, I would say, A Final Warning. That's the title. Understanding the Trumpet Days of Revelation, Final Warning. Remarkable situation we have here. I can hear the bumper music in the background, though, so hopefully everything is good. Carl, are you there?
I'm here, Dr. Bill. Thanks for having me on.
Good. I don't know why I heard that bumper. I heard some music in the background. Maybe it's the angels singing.
I heard it too, so we both heard the same angels.
There you go. Well, Carl, we've been going through a study here, and about every couple of weeks we try to get you in. You're a very busy guy because you're traveling around to ministries all over the place.
Yeah.
And I want you to summarize. You probably having quite an experience traveling to the different ministries. What are the key 2 or 3 questions that ministries or people, if they call in, ask about this book and why you wrote it and what the primary purpose is? What's the primary purpose of the book?
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Well, the primary purpose of the book is just to alert the church and Christians to the prophetic times in which we're living generally. Now, specifically, I focus in on the trumpet prophecies of Revelation. Of course, there are 7 trumpets that blow in the book of Revelation. There's a 7-seal scroll, there's 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls of wrath. I focus in on those because in those trumpet prophecies, there are some key words that correlate, perhaps, very well. I make the case very strongly in my book that they correlate to modern day or relatively modern day historical events. And the thing is, I want your audience to know, Dr. Bill, this is not stuff that I've pulled out of my back pocket to write some kind of sensational book. This is stuff that I've been watching, observing, documenting, preaching, and teaching about for 25 years. And all along the way, people have said these inferences, these biblical speculations, these facts that you're uncovering and tying together, these correlations are amazing. You need to put this in a book. And for years I've just resisted that. I knew it would be a lot of work. It would require.
Yep. All of a sudden I can't hear you. Let's see if we can reconnect with Carl. I think we lost his connection.
Can you hear me?
I can. I can hear you again. Somehow we lost your connection.
I could hear you the whole time. Where did I leave off?
Well, just so you were talking about the book
Dr.
and about
Bill?
how you... Yeah, I can hear you.
Dr. Bill?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you. Somehow we're having some technical troubles there.
We are.
John, I hear a bleep, bleep, bleep. Yeah, I think something's going on with your phone line. Something's happening there. So let's see if we can reconnect with Carl and see if we can get a better connection. And while we're doing that, I'm going to kind of talk about some of the issues in the chapters. One of the things I like about it is how it analyzes things like the wars and rumors of wars, trumpet number 2, which we see right now with the Sunni Shiite war. We see the trumpet number 3, which is Chernobyl, which means wormwood. And it talks about 1/3 of the sea dying because of wormwood. Well, 1/3 of the seas of the earth is the Pacific. So wormwood, which is from Fukushima Daiichi, started with 25 plus years ago with Chernobyl, which in basically, this is, by the way, Chernobyl is a reactor in Ukraine, which is interesting because it's now under, in a sense, in a geopolitical fire right now in Kiev. So the issue of Chernobyl, which is the proper way to pronounce it, means wormwood. And now I took care of people that actually survived the Chernobyl explosions, young people and older people. And some of them would have what we call periodic collapse of their immune system. I remember one young girl that I took care of, she would actually periodically, every 6 months, all her hair would fall out. And her white cell count would crash, and she would require blood transfusions because she started getting bleeding problems because she had an entire clone of her blood-producing cells. Carl, you're back. Hopefully with better connection.
Yes, I'm on a hard line. I don't know what the problem was. I'm so sorry if it was on my end.
Well, I don't. Well, my guess is it may well be technical, but I'm going to make a presumption that whether it's technical or not, there's powers that be, especially as it says in Ephesians, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and wickedness in high places, just like the prince of Persia that withheld the angel Gabriel coming to speak to Daniel to give him the prophecy. And, of course, at the end of Daniel, it says, close up and seal the words of this book to the time of the end. What we are doing today is unsealing the book of Daniel and other prophecies of the Old Testament, like a locksmith with the tumbler codes of all the keys. And what's what you're doing? You actually discern the tumbler codes like of Chernobyl, which is wormwood, and the wars and rumors of wars. So let's go through some of these prophecies, because last time we looked at the different, we call two witness groups, which are basically, in the end time, I call it the houses of Ephraim and Judah, in a sense, but it also in the Old Testament, it's in the church, it's the Philadelphians there, where Jesus is not just their Savior, but also their Lord. Unfortunately, most Christians, He is their Savior, but He's not their Lord. And there's a big difference. And this is something that people need to get. And also, if you have a church, it's a secret church that doesn't talk about prophecy, run from that church. Because prophecy in our day is the key to understanding God's wisdom and grace for this world before it either repents and is saved or it's destroyed. And we're heading toward destruction. If you even just look at it geopolitically and you look at this in a very cold-hearted kind of scientific viewpoint, almost like a chemist looking at the chemistry of the geopolitical mess that was going on, we do not have decades, we have years before destruction.
Yeah, no, it seems that way to an awful lot of folks. And you had just asked me before we had all the phone problems, you know what the purpose of writing the book was and what its main theme and message was. Would you like me to continue that, or you want to go another direction?
Absolutely, yeah, I want you to do that. Yeah, let's do that. And also, what are the key questions? Because you travel around, I want to hear what the heart of the people are asking you to say, and what are your answers?
Yeah, okay, good. Well, I appreciate that. Well, first of all, I wrote the book generally to wake up and to shake the church and Christians, particularly in America, to the prophetic times in which we're living. There are prophecies that are unfolding all around us, and I mean indisputable prophecies. Israel's back in the land, Jerusalem has been recaptured, it's surrounded by enemies, America's turning its back on it, the rise of Islam, ISIS, the butchery that's going on, the aligning of the nations, Iran, Russia, Turkey. I mean, all of this is in the Bible, and only in the Bible. It's not in the Quran. It's not in the teachings of the Hindus or Buddha or Nostradamus. It's in the Word of God, and it's unfolding before our eyes. We're the first and the only generation to see this stuff happening. So that's generally why I wrote it. Now, specifically, I focus in on the 7 trumpet prophecies of Revelation. I believe, and millions of others around the world believe, this doesn't make us correct. I'm not dogmatic about this, as you know, Dr. Bill. I try to stay humble about it. This is stuff I've been studying and researching for 25 years, but I believe the 7th trumpet of Revelation represents the rapture of the church. Now, one of the questions I get is, why do you believe that? And in just a moment, I would love to answer that, but let me still unravel why I wrote the book.
Well, it's the Feast of Yom Teruah, which in Hebrew means the Feast of the Long Blowing or Feast of Trumpets.
Well, yes, I'm going to explain that, at least the way that I see it. But if the 7th trumpet is a representation of a rapture of the church, and as I said, there are theologians, commentators, preachers, teachers, and millions of Christians around the world that believe that, then that means the first 6 trumpets would have to blow sometime before the gathering, the taking out, the protection of God's people. And so if that's true, then I started looking at this a quarter of a century ago, and of course things have unfolded since then, which have been amazing, and I noticed that in the trumpets there were key words. There were definitions, there were huge symbolism given. For example, in trumpet number 3, John was told, write this down, the name of this event is wormwood. Well, that's important. So does wormwood have a correlation? Then when you get to trumpet 5, it says, write this down. The name of the king that was over all of this mess, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, the Bible doesn't use the word mess, but the name of the king that was over this was Abaddon, Apollyon. Now that's important. There's a key word. You get to trumpet 6, and it says, now this will happen on the Euphrates River. Well, that has some distinctive possible prophecies to it. I hear the music, so we're going to
when we come back, we're going to say undo the tumbler lock codes of the book of Revelation and show that you're deep into the trumpet revelations.
Up until now.
What a beautiful world this will be.
And technical problems overcome. Out there, all our people are praying to keep those phone lines going and swat the demons off them. And the NSA or no such agency or anybody else is messing around with their communications. as it says at the time of the end in Daniel, that the word of God will rain down from heaven. Well, it's raining right now. And it says in those days, those two witness companies will stop up, so there shall be no rain in that day. People are thinking it's a physical rain, and yes, there's a drought worldwide in 9 states in America, but the real rain is the rain of the truth from the Most High God. And it's going to come down to two witness companies, two groups of individuals that are at the time of the end, which includes the saved Messianic Christians, which are the lineal tribe of Judah that are now accepted Messiah, and Ephraim, or the lost tribes of the northern state of Israel that have now become Christians because they become apostate and then became Gentiles and became saved through the people of the book who kept it, and Yeshua Jesus, who was a Jew. Quite amazing how God has a sense of humor, too. And what he's doing right now is he's basically gathering his people, like he says, I shall gather you like chicks. And he's sending forth people like yourself, because you're speaking, even though you don't take on the title, you're speaking prophetically to give the locksmith's key codes to understand that we're not going to have the revelations of the Most High God. We're already deep in it. So let's go through some of these trumpets so we can see exactly what they mean and the timing of some of these events and names.
Yeah, okay, well, I appreciate it. Yeah, well, I tell you, let me set this one. I mean, we can do several of them, but let me set this one up, because you ask what people, ask me a lot. They ask me,
right.
Well, okay, and by the way, I would sometime in the show like to get to sharing with your audience why I believe the seventh trumpet it represents the rapture of the church. There's a biblical clue, a biblical code and key for understanding that as well. But let's just assume for the time being that is an accurate statement, that the seventh trumpet that's in Revelation represents the rapture of the church. Then that means the 6 trumpets before that monumentous event would blow, of course, in real, human history. I mean, it would blow before any kind of a protection or gathering or rapture, before God pours out his wrath. So when you look at those, as I have been, as I said, for a quarter of a century, that's not some new thing with me. I've been a pastor in one place for 28 years. I know you believe me and your audience believes me, and it's in my book. I state it emphatically, but my church can testify. 28 years ago, I started showing them these things. About 25 years ago. And so this is not new with me. This is not something I invented for a sensational book. I've just finally put this information in a book. But anyway, let me unwrap a scenario here. If you look at trumpet number 6, and I'm going to paraphrase this stuff, but people can follow it back up in the scriptures. If you look at trumpet number 6, Dr. Bill, you see that there is a description of what looks like World War III. And of all things, it's centered in the Middle East. And of all things, not just in the Middle East, but it distinctly says along the Euphrates River, and it says something about 200 million troops or people that are fighting. And it speaks of 4 angels that are holding this back for a specific day, a specific hour, a specific time. So taking those key clues and words, like you said, tumblers to a lock, what do we know about this? Well, we know, first of all, that this war is of World War III proportions. I mean, there were 200 million people involved in World War II, but they were scattered from the European theater to the Pacific theater. But this says 200 million people in the Middle East. So here's a World War III scenario. Number 2, we know exactly where it's going to be. It's going to be centered. The heart of it is going to be along the Euphrates River. Now, that's astounding, because as you know, and as most of your audience knows, Dr. Bill, the Euphrates River starts in the northern mountains of Turkey, runs through Turkey, comes down through Syria, comes down and through Iraq, and empties into the Persian Gulf. Well, my goodness, I mean, that's the heartland of everything that's happening now, where ISIS is, and just on the other side of the river is Iran. So we've got Iran situated there, we've got Iraq situated there, Syria, Turkey. Turkey is a proxy for ISIS. They're supplying them passports, they're propping them up. Iran and Turkey are in compact, Iran and Russia's in compact, Iran and Turkey and Russia are now making nice with each other. And I mean, Syria is involved in all of this deeply. The United States is deeply involved in Syria. I mean, this is unbelievable. There it is, right there in the scriptures. The third thing that we know is that it's deeply spiritual. This is not a war over oil per se. It's not a war over land per se. It's not a war over some political thing per se. It's a war that's deeply religious, deeply spiritual. Well, guess happening in the Middle East right now. Of course, you know, ISIS, and it's all about killing and destroying Israel, killing and destroying Christians that are there, and it's deeply religious. They're desiring to destroy Israel, wipe it off the map. So we've got all of the elements fulfilled there. Now follow me. Here's what's striking. I'm going to say something in a moment that will floor your listeners if they don't know this. So we look at that and we say, okay, well, there's a pretty strong case for a World War III scenario. And by the way, we've got the Pope saying that we're in World War III already. We've got, you know, all kinds of commentators and media people and politicians. Michelle Bachmann just declared the other day, we're headed for World War III. Franklin Graham has declared it. So people around the world already smell and feel this spiritual atmosphere of a potential World War III. Well, Trumpet 6 describes that very scenario, describes exactly the kinds of things that are happening now, and describes exactly where it's happening. But watch this. In my book, I document that the New York Times did a detailed historical chronology of how we got to where we are now in the Middle East. And I've got this documented in my book, Final Warning, the New York Times documented that all of this began with the Gulf War and Saddam Hussein. Now, let me draw you the connection very quickly that they made. They said, look, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. It's about, you know, all the political intrigue that we know, and he's in Kuwait. 5 months later, we finally engage with a coalition of forces. We go in. 100 days later,
yeah, you're breaking up really badly, Carl. I can barely hear you. I want you to repeat that if you could. Again, we're getting what I call spiritual interference because they don't want this message clearly to give into the people. Yeah, so go a little bit slower. You just go a little slower until we get the break. We're going to reconnect and see if we can get a better connection for the next couple segments. By the way, if you can stay longer, we do have our hour 2 open. So if you want to stay longer, if we need to continue the message, because I don't think we have a lot of time left. We could literally have a war breakout with the Gulf of Tonkin event in the Gulf of Aden tomorrow or today.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. How much longer do I have? Because I'm getting to the point of making the punchline.
You got another couple minutes, so another minute or so. So let's continue.
Okay. Cut me off.
You're better now. You're better now. Maybe the devils have backed off. Let's continue.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm trying to remember where I backed off. Okay. What I was saying, the New York Times has made the case that Saddam Hussein, that whole thing in the Gulf War started where we are today, because you had I'll come back and fill in the details when we have a better connection, but the bottom line is you have the Gulf War. Out of the Gulf War, 10 years later came 9/11. Right. I hear the music, so let me try to do it on the other side.
Exactly. When we come back, and of course, 9/11 was announced 10 years to the day earlier by George Bush Sr., who was in Dealey Plaza arranging and helping the assistance of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And welcome back. And Carl Gallups is back in the book. You can get it at Amazon and also at your website. What's your website address, Carl?
It's carlgallups.com. CarlGallups, just like it sounds. carlgallups.com.
Right. Now, we as Christians, by the way, have to take our scepter and start being leader. I like to give people this analogy. The church is the bride of Christ. Now, if you know a wife, let's say the wife of a king is a queen, and she has a scepter as well, she has a right to tell her husband, and again, remember this is something for you out there, members of families. The husband, like the big fat Greek wedding, thinks he's, to quote, the head of the household and runs everything. But, as I say, the neck, which is the queen, turns the head. And we, as have a right to demand from God and to pray to God for intervention. We also have a responsibility to pick up our scepter and to Shema, hear and do God's will, which is the Father, to actually tell people to save them from not only physical but spiritual destruction or annihilation. Because that's what's coming. This is not a joke. Millions and billions will die in not only physical death but annihilation in the lake of fire, which is eternal. And the problem that people think is that this is a big joke, that this isn't going to happen. But if you look at it coldly, even if, let's say, you're an ancient archaeologist coming from a distant planet 10 million years from now, you'd look at America and the world and you'd say, was there ever a population on this planet? Why did they kill themselves? Well, they killed themselves because they allowed evil. And I tell people the reason why Obama is there, or why even Hillary Clinton could run for office, is that she is a symptom, and he is a symptom of a gutless and a godless population, just like the ancient people of Israel that worshipped the Apis bull when they came out of Egypt. And Moses, in his rage, had to, call down judgment on the people to say, you godless and obstinate generation. And that's the problem we have right now. We have an obstinate generation. And by the way, many of them, the judgment, as Jesus said, is going to start on the church. The church, by and large, is absent without leave. Many of them believe that they want to be diapered, i.e., they want Jesus to be their Savior, but they don't want the hard job of being their Lord, which means they're going to come in conflict with friends and relatives and may lose their job, or may actually have to file lawsuits, like, for example, here in California, to preserve your right to not be vaccinated, or to be prepared physically and spiritually for war or civil war, even inside America. People aren't ready. They're not ready to confront people within their church about abortion or about eugenics or anything else real, because they don't want to really accept the fact that the lordship of God is in their life, or prophecy, because as soon as you accept lordship, you must accept prophecy, which puts a responsibility on our heads, which is what you've done, Carl. You've actually shown a responsible Christian behavior, which is to warn fellow Christians that we're not going to have this future tribulation. We're in it.
Yeah. Well, no, you're right. I mean, that's a big part of it. Is just, well, for example, and I know people who are of a certain eschatological understanding would take offense at what you and I are saying right here. But we're not in the Great Tribulation. Well, listen, I understand that we might not be at a specific point in the final 7 years, etc. And that's all.
We're in the time of sorrows. We're in the time of sorrows. These trumpets are like birth pangs. These are signs like, and it's like the mother screaming in the birthing room, okay?
Exactly.
These are birth pangs.
Yeah, that's what trumpets are for. They are to warn and to wake up. And I do a study on that in my book. Trumpets throughout the Bible have always been for God's people. They're sounds of gathering for war. They're sounds of getting ready for a major event. They're sounds of calling to worship. They're sounds of alerting the fact that the king is arriving. I mean, the ark is coming into the tabernacle, et cetera, et cetera.
Exactly.
The trumpets are never, God's wrath on the unbelieving. The trumpets throughout the Bible are blown for the sake of God's people, always.
I got a little different take on the wrath of God, and people should kind of grasp this. All the destruction on this earth is not the workings and the doings of God. It's because God gave man the right to choose, and he chose to listen to the voice of evil and Satan. The only wrath of God is separation from him forever, which, by the way, he doesn't do to us, we do to him. So when people are not thrown into hell by God, they jump into it away from the righteousness and the Holy One of Israel, God.
Yeah.
And the only judgment God has is to accept your right to choose not to, in a sense, be married to him in the spirit and your soul, be married as one for eternity. God does not do anything evil. He allows you to destroy yourself by not having a relationship with him. And he accepts your right to choose that, even though it hurts him mortally. That's why he died on the cross. He basically says he accepted the fact of the right of people to choose not to have a relationship with him and to be annihilated, even if they're, quote, nice people that are Buddhists or atheists or agnostics, like this moron Pope talks about, which is an Antichrist Pope, that says that you can be a nice atheist and God will let you in. No. If you have no relationship, Jesus said, though you could cast out demons in my name or heal in my name, get away, you doers of evil, I know you not. In other words, you don't have God on speed dial. You don't pray to God. You don't have a relationship with God. Even if you do supernatural things by the powers of darkness, Beelzebub, you don't have a relationship with God. You're not married to him. You are separated. And I tell people, heaven starts today when you serve God. Hell becomes evident when the body drops away.
Yeah.
Heaven doesn't start when the moment of death. Heaven starts today when you walk supernaturally today with the Most High.
Right. No, that's very good. Dr. Bill, listen, because of our connection problems, I feel like that I've given a very disjointed understanding of my book.
Oh, no, you're doing well. You're doing fine. We're doing really good, actually. Our connection is perfect now. Please continue. I want to go through these trumpets.
May I pick up and go back to my unraveling of Trumpet 5 and 6 and how they tie together?
Absolutely.
And the
Let's
key
do that.
word and getting
Absolutely.
to the punchline for your audience?
We can roll back. We can even go into hour 2 if you have time to go over into the next hour. Sure.
Well, I don't. I wished I did, but at 3:15 I have a 3:15 Central Time. That's my time zone. I have another appointment. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We'll get you back and we'll continue. So let's continue on.
Okay. Well, let me go back, and to your audience, I apologize. We've had all these connection problems, and I don't want them to be disjointed in this understanding. So let me go back to where I was describing that Trumpet 6, of course, describes a World War III scenario in the Middle East. And by the way, I want to touch on this. It says 200 million people. Well, people ask me about that. I said, well, how can there be 200 million people fighting in the Middle East? Well, very easily. There's 400 million Muslims that live in the Middle East, and we know that women and children will take up arms and strap bombs on themselves. And so even if only half of them fight, there's 200 million. But we also know, of course, that more than likely... more than likely Iran, which are Persians, will be involved in this. Russia probably would be involved. China may be involved. China and Russia are in. There's headline news articles today. They're starting to make agreements and compacts. Surely Europe would be involved. Surely the United States would be involved. So you start adding all of that. I can see where easily 200 million people could be fighting to a bloody death in the Middle East, and starting there. And again, this is where leaders around the world and politicians and media figures are saying, look, we're on the verge of World War III. All right, well, Trumpet 6 describes that scenario in the exact location where this stuff is unfolding. Now, what I was saying before that we got disconnected by all the telephone problems was that in my book I document that the New York Times traces where we are today all the way back to Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait. He was in there for 5 months while he was before he was confronted by the coalition forces. Before he left, he set 800 oil wells on fire that burned for 11 months, darkened the sky as black as midnight in the middle of the day. It took 11 months to put it out. Unprecedented in human history. We'd never seen anything like that before. And then of course, after we go in, he's defeated. All right, and we think, well, everything's fine. Well, 10 years later, 9/11 happens. Well, as a result of 9/11, we send troops where? Back into Iraq and into Afghanistan. Well, the Iraq and the Afghanistan war lasts for 12, 13, 14 years. We still have troops over there. And then, of course, Barack Hussein Obama goes into office, and then out of that comes Arab Spring. Now, this is the New York Times. The New York Times is tracing this timeline. Out of Arab Spring comes the fall of Egypt and Libya, comes the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, then comes the rise of ISIS, and then all of the problems in Syria. Turkey becomes more and more Muslim. All of this begins to happen. The people in Israel said it was going to happen.
Just one natural supplement.
Welcome back, and Carl, we have crystal clear sound now, and of course, we're going to have you back on soon, so before you run at the end of the program, we'll get you rebooked to get you back, because I'm sure people want to get your book and hear your interpretation. So these trumpets, by the way, let's rock through some more of them so we can understand we are in the days of trumpets.
Yeah, well, what I really want to get to the punchline here. So the point is, it's documented in my book that the New York Times makes all these connections, starting with Saddam Hussein, coming right on up through where we are now in the Middle East. I've got this documented. Well, here's the kicker. So when you look at Trumpet 5, what do we discover but that something happens, an event happens that begins with the invasion of a people for 5 months. The term 5 months is actually in the Scriptures. It's in there twice in Trumpet 5. I've got it documented from military and historical sources that Saddam Hussein was in Kuwait exactly 5 months until the coalition forces confronted him. That Trumpet 5 goes on to say that something involved in this invasion involves the blackening of the sky with fire and smoke that comes out of the bottomless pit, the Bible says, and that word pit in Greek is P-H-R-E-A-R, freer, and that word pit literally translates as well. Your listeners can look that up. Now, what did Saddam Hussein do but set 800 oil wells, bottomless pits, if you will, on fire and filled the air with smoke, darkened the skies as black as midnight, which is what Trumpet 5 says will happen. Out of that, came in Trumpet 5. John said, I saw something that looked like these giant locusts shooting fire out of their tails, and the sound of their wings sounded like thundering chariots. Well, I mean, was he describing Transformer science fiction things, or was he describing hardware, military equipment of today that he could not have known 2,000 years ago? It would have looked like science fiction to him. Well, many believe, millions believe around the world, as I do, that he was describing real-life things that are right in front of our face, but we're looking for Transformer monsters because of certain interpretations of the Scriptures, and we're going to miss it. And so what happened in the Middle East, that the Gulf War, thousands of tanks crawling the desert floor, thousands of helicopters back and forth through the air, and firing missiles and shooting fire out of their tails, so to speak, and their wings their hair sounded like the wings sounded like thundering trumpets. So all of this, but get this, Trumpet 5, it ends by saying, the king over all of this. In other words, the one that started it all. This is what it says in the Bible. His name is Abaddon or Apollyon. Now, Abaddon is Greek, Apollyon is Hebrew, as you know. Excuse me, the vice versa. Apollyon is Greek, Abaddon is Hebrew, as you and your audience know. And those words translate into English as the destroyer. Now, in my book, I have it profusely documented, including Harvard School of Persian Languages, including Arabic and Persian-speaking people right out of the Middle East. The term the destroyer, translated into Persian, is Saddam. So the Scriptures literally say that something's going to happen for 5 months. The skies are going to be darkened. The pits are going to be open, the bottomless pit. It's going to cause locust-looking things to crawl all over the desert, death and destruction, and it's all going to be started by somebody named Saddam. If you're reading it in Persian, that's what it would say. Well, then next comes Trumpet 6, a war of monumental World War III proportions in the Middle East on the Euphrates River, and it's spiritual. And I'm telling you, either this is some of the biggest coincidences in the world, or it's prophecy unfolding before our very eyes, and you had to tick the locks and let the tumblers fall, and it had to happen first before we could make the word connections and the key connections. And this is what my book does with all of the trumpets.
Right, and it's not just a spiritual, you call it says they shall come to take a spoil. The spoil is not just the spoil of the land and the spiritual, we call principalities over the land. When I traveled in 1999 with Hayseed Stevens at his invitation to the southwest end of the Dead Sea, I had prepared a prayer in Hebrew to say at the Yom Teruah drill site, which is drilled down to around 26,000 feet, and they lost a drill bit on their way down. They had done a number of drills. The Israelis had already been drilling for more than 15 years beforehand under Ariel Sharon. And FICO, who was their oil engineer that discovered the Leviathan field off of Cyprus, the fields in Zohar, and all the gas fields in the Sinai Peninsula. So what happened is, I told Hayseed that I had been supernaturally revealed the actual geology at the southwest end of the Dead Sea, and that the largest batholith of oil on Earth, which is an ocean of oil, was under the southwest end of the Dead Sea at the bottom of a 26,000-foot salt dome, called the Salt Dome of Lot's wife, believe it or not.
Wow.
And when we went down and prayed there, which was on the feast of, we actually prayed there in the Feast of Tabernacles, and well, actually, no. It was actually the first of the New Year. It was first of the New Year, not the Feast of Tabernacles. We prayed the Feast of Tabernacles of the New Year. What happened is that exactly 1 year later, Ariel Sharon went with a 1,100 plexiglass holding guards to actually go up and say prayers on a Temple Mount, which really isn't the Temple Mount. He went up to what's called the Fortress of Antonius, because the actual place where the temple was the Springs of Gihon at the East Gate. But what happened is I told him, I said, Hayseed was going to drill for the Israeli Oil Company and open up this batholith, which is the largest batholith. And I told him, I said, if you drill there, you will have the sound of oil will be heard, the scream of the oil will be heard, and you won't be able to stop the pressure, just like at the Macondo drill site, which, by the way, in Haitian, Macondo means the devil's food, which is off of the New Orleans coast. And I said, don't do it, because you're going to bring all these armies, because my sister, who was a journalist and spoke 3 different dialects of Chinese, she was a journalist for the Hong Kong Daily News for years, and married a gentleman in Canada from China. She was a linguist and a journalist. She told me that the Red Book of Mao Zedong actually quotes Revelation 9, that he could raise an army of 200 million. So, believe it or not, Mao Zedong is quoting the Bible in his Red Book.
Yeah.
What people need to understand here is that I told Hayseed that at the southwest end of the Dead Sea, and there's a lot of oil in places like Venezuela, they estimate that in their tar pits and so on, they've got 7 trillion barrels of oil, which is many times more than 800 billion that's in Saudi Arabia. But at the southwest end of the Dead Sea, I told them there was 27.2 times the entire world proven oil reserves, and it was renewable because it's an ocean. See, the Earth is a nuclear reactor, and Gold's theory, which was in the 1950s, proved that oil comes from literally the bottomless pit. It's not made by dinosaurs and ferns.
Right. No, I agree.
And the largest batholith, in fact, FICO himself, the engineer, told us, and he's the one who discovered the oil, that a fault line that runs from Turkey right through to Lake Victoria, the magma hit the oil field, and that's what caused the destruction at the time of Lot, that destroyed a good part of what's called the Dead Sea. Much of the Dead Sea is not as old as people think. It was a well-watered valley of Siddim. And so what happened is when the magma hit it, it literally ejected a large enough mass into space that it was literally the size of, Brussels or whatever. It was big. It was a giant area that was literally ejected into orbit, and by the explosions that occurred at the Dead Sea. And they estimated, and this is FICO's own estimation from the Israeli nuclear forces and their own scientists, 200 million Hiroshima bombs. 200 million.
Yeah.
Now, so what people need to understand here is the reason why Russia and China want this is to take a spoil, because at that southwest end of the Dead Sea is 95% of the potash on Earth for growing food, and literally more oil than the entire world oil produced reserves by 27.2 times.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's the reason you have dynastic wealth there for food and for energy.
Right.
And so, God, you see, even though the Israeli people were brought back in unbelief, God was given the Abrahamic covenant. This is the mother lode, like Charlton Heston would say. This is the mother lode of oil for the planet. That land, that oil was not just given to, quote, the Jews, it was given to Christians. What really should happen is the state of America should annex Israel and annex the entire territory from the Euphrates River right to the Nile and hand it over not to, quote, a religious, hyper-religious minority, and not partition the land to a bunch of Muslim Satanists, but to allow a Christian state like the state of America, a republic, to rise up in the Middle East with hundreds of millions of Christians moving there from all over the world to our nation of Israel.
Right.
That's what should happen. And a lot of people want to abandon Israel. They're fools. We need to realize that as Israel goes, so does America. So those that curse Israel...
I agree. Thank you so much for having me on your show today, Dr. Bill.
We're going to have you back on, so stay right there, Carl. We'll give you another time to come back with better sound. And hour 2 is open lines on any topic, 800-259-5791. Stay right there, Carl. We'll give you your time.